Welcome to the Authentic Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea John. We are all on a journey, and our journeys consist of stories. There are real people like you and me that have incredible stories that infuse everyone with hope, and they deserve to be shared. Today's guest is Justin Cook. He co-hosts Stillwater's Retreat and Worship Nights in Atlanta, Georgia, alongside his wife. Join us as Justin shares his story of tragically losing his son, but guides us down the path of experiencing hope even through grief. So let's get today's journey started with your tour guide, Justin Cook. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of My Story. Today we have an amazing friend of mine called Justin Cook. He actually grew up with my husband. They have a lot of history. Justin is based in Atlanta. One day we'll tell you the story. What did you say? Atlanta is for? Oh, I love that. It is for dreamers.
Atlanta's for dreamers. Yeah, I can't stand up more because I have sweatpants on. So, top half professional.
I have running pants on today. So
there we go.
Yeah. Yes. So one day maybe we'll share Justin and Mike's story together. Actually, Justin's been on a podcast where he shared his story, so maybe we can link that over too. So Justin is awesome. Him and his wife Ollie are just amazing people. They live just outside Atlanta, in the Atlanta area, in an amazing property, which he'll tell you about some worship nights. So Justin, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us as little or as much as you want.
Okay, awesome. So, the subject today is about when we had a moment in our lives, which of course there's many of these, but the profound moment of loss or pain, and then like how God showed up. So I will do like a quick, and I do mean quick, kind of background of my life to give people a little bit of context. So I was raised in my formative years in a Christian cult. Basically, it was a cult of control. So, pretty, I'd say like fundamental, charismatic, most similar to like Foursquare denominationally. But what made it culty was we had a leader that we revered and thought of as like the man of God, and he got to kind of control our lives. So kind of like the big headlines for my young life was kind of the most important decisions that a young man or woman makes typically in their life were sort of made for me. So I was in an arranged marriage. I was told which house to buy, and I was told when to have kids. So those are the type of things that were sort of taken out of my space. So so I ended up having 3 beautiful, amazing kids with the woman that I was in this arranged marriage with. And for a whole bunch of reasons, it was ended up being a pretty tumultuous, unhappy marriage and life. And so my kids kind of came up in this. And the way our cult was structured, it was very socially structured to where the closer you were to the center, to the people that were in power, the better your life was, the more you were accepted into the group, and the better off you were kind of in every single way. And then the further you got out to the edges, sort of the more separated you were from the cult. And it's kind of hard to imagine in modern day America because we don't live in villages, but it's a well-structured cult is very similar to like sort of a village or tight-knit small community, right? So there's a lot of good things that come with that too. But again, the downside is if you're sort of towards the edge, it can be really lonely and painful because A, you're stuck with them, and B, you're not super well accepted. So you're in this kind of like awkward in between. And sort of my history with them was sort of like I would journey in towards the center and towards acceptance, and then kind of slip out of that. And so the repercussions to my kids were they were sort of really, really at the far edges. And not to get into too much to their biological mom, but their biological mom had just a lot of like mental and emotional issues. So they lived a really tough life at home with her. And then when they were in the context of the cult community, they were considered outsiders and no one really wanted to be around them. So it sort of fostered this, pretty unhealthy childhood in a lot of ways for them. My personal childhood was a lot more fun before marriage. So, but that's a separate issue. So, ended up getting divorced, and then eventually, like you said, we all lived in Florida, and then I eventually moved to Atlanta, and I'm remarried now to an amazing woman, my wife Ollie. That's my nickname for her, and she's an incredible woman. And one by one, my kids all came to live with us, which was incredible. But my oldest, the story's about, he had the hardest time with everything. So even like when I sat my family down when they were younger and told them, hey, me and your mama are probably going to get divorced, but I want to like make sure you guys are okay with it and all this stuff. My youngest was thrilled. He was like, yes, you guys have been hanging here too long. This is such a waste of time. So stupid. Thank God. My daughter in the middle was like, kind of sad, but kind of like, yeah, I kind of saw this coming. My oldest, Joshua, was very brokenhearted because for him, like stability and kind of having this sense of whatever structure there was, and sort of, or the illusion of it getting broken was very, very difficult for him. So anyways, fast forward to I live in Atlanta, I'm remarried, and now I've got kind of this place of stability and strength that I can invite them into when they're ready. And so one by one they come. So the very first one to come was Joshua, my oldest, and just an incredible human being. He's just like the most loving, caring person. Definitely one of those people that kind of feels the world type of kid, and incredibly intelligent. Like taught himself how to program and build games from nothing on the computer. Had sort of like an engineer's mind for problem solving, but all the while, huge heart for anybody who was on the outside of the underdog, which would make total sense. So a huge heart for the LGBTQ plus community, for people of color, just anybody that was oppressed or pushed to the margins. Like he just had this huge heart and kind of felt everything, and just a lot of times you could tell just didn't always know what to do with all that. So when the first few years when he lived here, he really, he followed God in his own way, but he just, he did it a little different than my wife and I did things a little more traditionally maybe, but he followed God. He was amazing, and he touched so many lives. But starting in like 2018, I think it was, I'd say 2018, he kind of made the decision that he wasn't going to be a Christian anymore. And so he kind of went down that path and started to notice that he just like, it was interesting with him. He didn't reveal his struggle with like mental health and with depression very much, because he was such an inward person, and he also started kind of pushing all of us away, so we didn't have as close of a contact with him. But he just kind of separated himself and kind of went down this path where he was more and more to himself. But we would talk to him from time to time, and anyways, he was just this amazing person, and I knew someday that we would be reunited. I just knew that if I just gave it time, that the fences would be mended. And I understood how like his young life had really affected him, and he was just really struggling to deal with that and then deal with the bigger world. So anyways, last year in 2020, on a Sunday, I pick up a phone, I get a phone call, and it's a police officer, and she is telling me that my son had taken his life. And it was the weirdest thing, because while she was telling me this, she was, telling me that he was gone, and you're just like processing that, like, one of the hardest things a parent could ever hear.
I can't even
Like,
imagine.
right. I hope nobody has to ever deal with this. It's a kind of unfathomable pain. But the craziest thing, like the second she told me, it sort of registered with me, I saw a vision of him. And it's so interesting, because like I could see if I'd had a few minutes like process and freak out, and then, but it was like the second she told me, it was like I kind of saw, it was like immediately I went into this vision, and it was just maybe like a 6 to 10 second video that looped over and over and over again. But my son was a minimalist, so he bought 7 pairs of shirts and pants that were exactly the same, and he had almost no earthly possessions. He didn't care about, he was the opposite of a capitalist, couldn't have cared less about stuff, lived incredibly, incredibly simply. So pretty much the only thing he had in the whole world was this backpack, which had like a computer and like just some really basic stuff. So he always had this like little black backpack he carried with him. But anyways, in this vision, I saw these gates, kind of like these old iron gates opening up, and I saw my son begin to run through the gates, and he dropped his backpack as he began to run through the gates, and I could just see this wild joy and freedom, which was the first time I, of course, seen that on him in forever. He hadn't experienced that probably in years, and it just played over.
Was this still while you were on the phone with the officer?
I'm telling you, it was literally like she says, "I'm so sorry to inform you, Mr. Cook, but we found your oldest son." She begins to describe the manner in which, he decided he didn't want to be here anymore. And literally, as the words are coming out of her mouth, it's registering in my head. So I'm going, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," starting, of course, to cry. But literally in that split second, before she could even hardly really say anything else, like this experience, this like, yeah, I don't even know how to describe it, but I'm like taken into this movie where God is playing me this video of my son when he crossed over basically earlier that morning into paradise. And the way I saw it was just him running again through this gate, dropping his backpack, which was kind of like, to me, like his, whatever his earthly stuff was. And it was just into a wide open green field. It was really it's very simple, which is very Josh. And then after that, I had a couple more really cool experiences. I was talking to a friend who used to be my counselor, and she asked me where Jesus was in the scene. And at the time I hadn't seen this, but like a couple days later, I did that thing where you ask God, okay, where were you in this? And I saw Jesus catching him when he jumped. And so I put the two together. It was like Jesus catching him, and then I'm seeing him run through the gates, which was profound for me as a father, because I couldn't be there for him in this moment of like excruciating pain. And there was probably nothing I could have done, because he was so determined. He was so thoughtful about how he decided he didn't want to be here anymore. And so to know that when I couldn't do anything more for him, and I couldn't be there for him, Jesus was there catching him and putting him in paradise. And it was wild. And then another really strange thing, I had I had 2 more times where I asked God to show me what he was doing. And one of the times I saw him, he was exploring, he loved nature. And so I saw him exploring a pretty like wild, rocky, beautiful, almost like the volcanic rocks you see in Hawaii, kind of that type of scenery. And then the last time I asked, he was in a library, and he was just like learning. And it was like, basically he was get to relearn what the meaning of life was, and just so many things that he had never been able to understand on this side of it. He was getting to learn and understand there, which was really amazing. But yeah, the really wild thing is for the next month from the day that he the day that he left us, I lived in a state of grace, and it's the only way I know to describe it. So I was, of course, able to mourn him. I was able to talk to everybody that had questions or whatever and tell them like what had happened and all this, just kind of process through it, which is really good. I was able to verbally process the event many, many times, which from a therapy point of view is really, really good. I was able to just say it over and over and over again, which is really, really great. But for that month, I felt kind of this tangible presence of God in sort of like truly in like the female sort of comforting sense of
Mhm.
Holy Spirit, where it just felt comfy and close. And I was aware, even during that season, I was aware that this wasn't going to last forever. I mean, I knew like that not for the rest of my life, I wasn't going to get to feel this.
Right.
And there was something really, it was really intentional and beautiful the way God met me during that next month, and which would have been the absolute hardest period because it's so fresh. And it was just fascinating to me. I just realized that like, where it says that God is near to the brokenhearted, and he's so attracted to your brokenness, to your pain, and to your suffering. That's just his nature. And when you're at those lowest moments, there's almost this weird thing. If you get to experience a side of God in a comforting, beautiful, the mother heart of God, you get to experience that in a way that I don't think you get to experience, or at least I have never gotten to experience when things are going well. Like, thankfully, right now in my life, we were talking about this before we got on. It's like, I'm very grateful. Like, this year has been so much better than 2020. 2020 was awful.
Not because of COVID.
No, not because of COVID. Nothing to do with
COVID was
COVID.
just
Yeah,
like
it was just
cherry on top.
yes. I didn't even get COVID until this year, and that wasn't too bad. But anyways, 2020 was just awful, and so but I recognized even during that time that sweet, comforting presence was probably something that I was only going to get to experience during that point. And of course, you would never like sign up for like, yeah, I'd really like to have a horrible experience so I can experience this. But when you're in that situation, because that's what life is, of course, ups and downs. When you're in those valleys, to know that he's with you and that you get to experience a side of him that only shows up, at least for me anyways, only shows up during those moments, is one of the beautiful parts, I think, of having a relationship with Jesus and being on this journey. So anyways.
So when you, because I know, like you said, 2020 was a tough year here in our house. 2020 was an awful year too, and not because of COVID.
Yeah.
So it was just a tough year. But would you say that your relationship with God is what gave you the strength to go through? Because you mentioned how when you were on the phone with the officer, you had that vision. And then obviously you mentioned how you went back and to kind of see where Jesus was in that. So just for the watchers, if those who are, watching now, prophetically speaking, our imagination is a very powerful tool. It's something that I write about in my book. And it's also something that we teach about in a ministry that I co-lead with my husband called Jesus House. And we actually have a teaching on that with an activation of how to use your imagination to walk through. It's not forced, it's not difficult, but it's a way to meet Jesus, right? And to hear him. So was it hard for you in that time? Like you say, you had that month where Holy Spirit was comforting you, which I totally get, right? It's like you're hanging on, but what was it hard for you to have the hope, that it was all going to be okay? Or what did you do to help you get through it? How did you perceive God in such a dark time? Because I know sometimes we go through dark times, it's almost hard, like, God, where are you? So what was like your experience? Was it hard for you, or was your relationship with Jesus already in such a place where it kind of was effortless?
Effortless, no. But yeah, thankfully, I think if you've been walking with Jesus for a little bit, you've got some wells, some reserves to pull on, which I think are really important when you're going through a dark time. Sometimes, there was a writer, a long time ago, I think hundreds of years ago, who talked about the dark night of the soul, and that phrase "dark night of the soul" has stuck in Christian thought for hundreds of years. And I think it's important when you're walking through those places to have had a relationship with God. I think that's really important. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was effortless. I was trying to follow all, because there's probably a number of different things that you were asking there. I will say, God has put the banner of hope over my life. There's a whole other long story I could get into. I had an encounter with God after a movie, and in the theater, God showed me that the banner over my life is hope. So I feel like it's one of the things that He's given me, a gift of hope. And hope is a funny thing. I believe hope is the soil that faith grows out of. So we think of faith a lot in the Christian community, right? Faith pleases God and all this stuff. But faith is not an act of will. So you can't just go, oh, I believe. That's not how it works.
If you have to force yourself to believe, it's not a belief.
Right, exactly. And faith is also a gift. So the way I've experienced faith many times is it has very little to do with what emotionally or mentally how I'm feeling about a situation. Whole other discussion. But it births from a place of deep hope, which to me, hope is on purpose. It is both very solid and very, I don't want to use the word vague. I'm trying to think what the right word is. It's both solid, like you can anchor your life to it, and it's not super defined and structured. So some people, in the West, we love doctrine. So not to offend anybody, but as I've sort of deconstructed a little bit from my Western view of faith, we've replaced a lot of probably how our Jewish brethren and forefathers viewed God, which was much more about relationships and following kind of the rhythms of what he had laid out for them, and replace that with like doctrine. So that's why we have 30,000 plus denominations and stuff, and then we get really, really married to our particular doctrine, which doesn't mean doctrine's bad. It's just the way we as Westerners process.
Right.
Right. So one downside of doctrine is if you have rows and boxes, and then life, which I hope everybody's sitting down, life is going to mess up your doctrine. It just is. So you have this idea.
It will make you question everything you believe.
If it doesn't, then you're a vegetable, or you're really dumb. No
or
offense.
You're
and if
in
you're really
denial.
Dumb,
or you're in denial.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. Deep denial. I actually have a dear friend right now who is coming through a lot of counseling and looking back at her life. And a young lady I grew up with in the cult, she's realizing she spent the vast majority of her life in denial. And this has been just the last few weeks. It's been like a really difficult, beautiful season, realizing that part of her chipper, happy-go-lucky, whatever is, guys, if you just keep pretending there's no monsters, then maybe there's not. Right. And sometimes that's an easier thing to do. But hope is this thing where it's not like in our Western mind, we love logic. Logic puts rockets to the moon and, helps your computer work and all this stuff. It's wonderful. Like everything that we experience pretty much in our world outside of nature is run on logic. So I don't knock logic, but hope and then the faith which grows out of that are not super logic based. So you end up having to anchor to something bigger than that, and you ultimately are anchoring to the character of a person, and that person is God. And your understanding of that God, whether the God that you're serving is love, or is judgmental, or is harsh, or is kind, like however that is constructed in your head, and however you view your relationship is going to determine, like when you hit those rough patches and you're needing to anchor back to something, if your hope is in, for instance, a very judgmental God, then you might say to yourself, man, I must have screwed up. Or if you believe in karma, like I must have done something in this or a previous life, that messed me, or whatever that thing is. Versus if your hope is in a good God, it can carry you through when very clearly your circumstances are not great. And so for me, yeah, I was, that's a huge thing, is I feel like I'm anchored into a good hope. And just very briefly, you did mention the prophetic and the seeing thing. I love doing like imagination, using your holy imagination and stuff. And probably because I've practiced that is the reason I can so easily slip into a prophetic vision from time to time. But I will say the two that, for sure, the first one was not one that I willingly stepped into, right? Which is totally good, because sometimes you're like, all right, God, I'm going to begin to sort of activate my holy imagination like you to meet me here. That's awesome. This wasn't that. This was, I couldn't process. My brain was numb, and this thing came to me as real as me and you are talking. So, but I will say, I do think it's partly just being open to that and practicing that. So.
Right. Like it wasn't completely foreign to you. I do think that, like you said, our understanding, our belief of who God is has a lot to do with it's the way I say it has a lot to do with the quality of our life.
Yeah.
And it goes back to exactly what you're saying. Like, I never thought of it that way. It's the hope. Where is your hope anchored? Because when I went through a really tough time, the God that I knew was sitting on the throne, waiting to bang me over the head, wanting me to follow his rules. So I didn't pray. It's something that I also mentioned in the book. I didn't pray for a year, and it actually led me to a place of hopelessness because my God was gone. I chose it. And then when he encountered me with all his mercy and grace, like you said, it was one of those, I didn't bring it on. He just came upon me like love. And it completely changed my life. And that's why, like, now to me, it's like God and love are synonyms. Like, love is God. It's a person. Everything he does is out of that place. And, he's got my back. He's got your back. And I really do think when we go through tough times, like 2020 stunk, life really threw one at us. But when you have a God that loves you and you just like hang on, it's important. Lastly, to finish off, I think you'll agree that also going through tough times, community is super important. Having people around you, because we have God and he's like the core of all things. But I also think that having people there to support you and love you through it is super important. I always use the analogy, I know your other son is in the military. And I always use the analogy of three military guys, and one gets injured, and there's always two that carry him to safety. Having those two people that you trust enough to let them drag you to the right place of safety is important in life. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that. And I think that intentionally surrounding yourself with people is good, even when you want to be left alone, because I'm an introvert, I like to be left alone. But when you're going through not nice things, I think it's really important to force yourself to be around people. And I know that you and I were just talking before we started recording. You have these worship nights that you're right out, you're in the Atlanta area, you're doing these worship nights, and how refreshing it is. And a lot of times just coming together, it's like a family coming together and we're worshiping God. But I think having people together in one place is super powerful. So can you tell us a little bit about the worship nights, but also like, did your community of people help you get through your year as well? And if you want to elaborate, take a couple minutes to talk about that.
Yeah, community has been unbelievably important the little church that we're a part of here in the Atlanta area, like every church, you could find 101 things for like, oh, they don't do this well, or they don't do that well. Right. And I think a lot of churches also have something that they do particularly well. So some churches are really like missionary centric, and some are really like supernatural centric. Some are very like Bible centric. Some are very like acts of service to the community. Ours is very much about building community. So basically being there for you, just exactly to what you said, like having community around you. I think that's the thing they probably do the very best. And so we are incredibly fortunate, but because earlier in the year I'd had something really awful happen to me, and they were there for my wife and kids while I was going through that. And then when Joshie passed, once again, the gathering of community around us. And I will say, I got to, again, verbally process, and people came and came to be around me. Most of my processing was on the phone with people. I think the part that really touches me was for my daughter Jasmine, because for my three kids, they were like the three amigos, and they were always supposed to be together. And they'd kind of promised each other, they're always going to be together. And so there was a level of devastating for her, especially. My son was at that point, he had just shipped out to the Marine Corps. He was actually during those first few months, he was in boot camp, which technically in the Marines, it's a little technicality. You're not a Marine until you make it through boot camp. You're a recruit, and they will all happily tell you that. You're a piece of garbage until you make it through that. So he's kind of being occupied by the rigors of that and kind of dealing with it sort of on his own. But Jasmine, who was here, the way the community came around her, I could, like, if I'd had all the money in the world, I couldn't have bought a better support system for her. And I will say, as a dad, again, as your kids get older, you have so much less and less control, or that's even the wrong word, but like say in their life.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have influence, right? You have influence to some extent, but it's only to the extent that they want you to.
Right.
And that's right. And that varies at different points in their life when they want you there or not want you there so much. So having that was incredible, absolutely incredible. And earlier in the year when I was going through it, people came around my wife, literally, that was insane. Like they were with her 24/7, when that's a whole other thing we'll get to talk about at some point in my crazy life story. And then, yeah, worship nights have been really, really important. One of my friends, Chris Masters, up here in the Atlanta area, does a worship night once a month. And it's very, like, it's not affiliated with any particular church. There's usually 20, 30, 40 churches represented, depending on how many people show up. If you're looking at, churches being represented. And it's very unstructured. So, although there's a couple of songs they practice ahead of time, a lot of it is just sort of flowing worship, and there's prayer and prophecy. And what's that?
It's my favorite kind.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's the best. And it's like, for myself and the season I'm in, it is the biggest drink of cool, refreshing water to my soul. And I talk about it with the other people that are involved, and for all of us, and many of these people are involved in churches in different ways and support or whatever. And it's a place to come in where nothing is expected of them. They can pour out if they want to, receive if they need to, do both. That has been, I will say, yeah, I don't know how I would do my life without it. I know it would go on, but it would be so much less vibrant and all that stuff. So I will throw this out there. If you're in the Atlanta area and you want to go, fair warning, it's a charismatic space. So if you're not okay with charismatic people, don't come. I don't say that as like to try to keep you out. I don't want you to be in a space that makes you uncomfortable. But if you're comfortable with weirdo charismatic people, they're beautiful. Like, they're just lovely, amazing people. And yeah, super, super fun. You can reach out to me and I will get you on the invite list. And we host some of them on our property. You've been on our property, but God blessed us with this insane property at the end of 2018, and we moved onto it in 2019. And it has a little, we call it barn, and we're able to host 3 or 4 times a year. We're able to host one.
Yeah, we're totally jealous of you and that property because I would love to live there.
It was one of the biggest divine gifts that I can point to in the last few years, where it was so clearly God. It's an incredible gift and meant to be shared.
Yes, definitely. Well, Justin, thank you so much for your vulnerability and openness and sharing. I know that it was hard. It's hard to talk about, right, when your feelings come into play, and it's an emotional topic, but I thank you for sharing it. And I just encourage the people who are watching, when you're going through a tough time, just know that Jesus is there with you. You're not alone. When you cry, he's there. He's hugging you. He's wiping your tears. He's, like Justin was sharing, that month of comfort that he had afterwards. It's kind of those things that help carry you when you're in a dark place, and until you're ready to carry out on your own, he's there. And dark times, good times, but there is a special thing, none of us want to experience those tough times, but some of the most intimate and life-changing moments I've had, and I actually just recorded one this morning, was during one of the hardest times of my life. And it's when I got to encounter God as love, and it changed my life. And had I not gone through that tough time, I may still be in this religious space. But thankfully, there's freedom, and there's love, and there's joy, and there's hope. Even when life sucks, because it does. I know to some people it's a no word, but you know what? There's other words to describe life, and sucks is just a mild one.
Yeah,
but sometimes life gets tough, and you just kind of, if you don't have that anchor, like you were saying, you don't know who God really is, it's going to affect how you march on and go through. And after I had my encounter with God, I had like a year to 2 years where it was like smooth sailing, everything was great. Then it was like the enemy came in and is like, oh yeah, let me see if you really believe all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I can say that I went through one of the toughest times of my life in 2020.
Yeah.
And it was okay. Like, I think it had the capability to destroy me, and it did not, because I had the opportunity to know who God is as love, and he was there for me, and tap into the promises of Jesus, even when the trials and tribulations were there. And that's really what I want for everyone. It's what I want for the viewers. I want everyone to experience it. And that's why I'm working on all this content and the book and the shows, because I just want people to know, hey, this is possible. It's out there, real people living it. And if it's possible for me and for you, it's possible for anyone.
I agree. Yeah, no, it's true. I think, my faith has evolved so much, continues to evolve. I feel like every 6 months, it's sort of like the shedding of a skin, and it changes. And, but anyways, I would definitely, if someone came to me with a fairly clean slate or from another like faith background and just wanted to know, like, is it worth it? I would unequivocally say yes. Like following Jesus and getting, again, you talked about it earlier, and I had the same kind of general understanding of God as the big cop in the sky, getting past some of that and getting down to who he really is for you, with no religious stigmas and preconceived notions that are put on you, but like your relationship with God, obviously, based on hopefully a good biblical foundation. You gotta have a good biblical foundation. But then, just getting to know him as a person is such a, man, I genuinely I feel for people who don't have that, whether they're Christian or don't think of themselves as Christian. I really, really feel for people that don't have it, because I don't know how I would have made it through my crazy life. And I know there's probably people who've had much crazier lives than I have. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know how people, I've thought about that. I don't know, someone who doesn't have Jesus, how do you do it?
I know. It's like my hat's off to him. I'm like, you are a stronger person than me, for real. Like, just straight
up. Because I mean, it's, willpower and human ability at some point comes to an end. And we're just sharing kind of what works for us and what makes it, kind of makes it all possible. So hopefully this helps someone who's struggling, doesn't know, like, is the faith worth it? Is it, and this is like, I know Justin believes a lot like I do. And this is not a faith where it's rule-based and you're expected to be perfect. And if you're not, oh, you don't get this. That's totally what, the God that I believe in, that has changed my life. That's not how he operates. There's a lot of gifts that are given that sometimes some forms of Christianity will teach as if it's earned, when the reality is they're gifts. And you need to understand that. And when you do understand that it's a gift, you actually don't take it for granted, and you put value on that gift, and you wind up not living a certain way, not just because you have to, but because you see and understand and fully appreciate the gift that has been given. And there's no way in this world that you're going to take it for granted, So that's just the way I see it.
Yep.
Just thank you so much for being with us. We will share Justin's contact information. So if you're in the Atlanta area, you can go check him out. Or if you're passing through, who knows, he may be having a worship night and you may want to attend. So thank you, Justin, so much. And hopefully we'll see you soon, because I know you have a lot of projects going on. So I'm sure our paths will cross again.
I hope so. Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of My Story. I hope you enjoyed being part of our conversation and found yourself infused with hope as Justin shared his stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. Oh yeah, and remember to share it with your friends and family. Until next time.